Hi everybody, it's Dan here. I hope you're well and coping during lockdown. I think it's a surprisingly creative time for everybody. And I've been doing lots of work because it's been sunny, and when I can, go and sit outside and taking the iPad with me. And so I've been exploring various apps and I've really fallen in love with Nanostudio2 recently. I was a big Core Gadget user. And I still use it, but I do love Nanostudio2 primarily because I can work with the other synths that are available on the market, and also MIDI effects and MIDI sequences. And what I wanted to show you was one called Aphelian, which is a particularly novel way of working. If I just show you very quickly, this is what Aphelian looks like. Now, we're not going to use the full app inside Nanostudio2. We're just going to use an element of it that's provided. But the idea with Aphelian is that you have various shapes and moons and a drum machine, and these shapes and moons can create rhythmic patterns. If we have a look at one like this, for example, and we play it back, we can see this interesting sort of star shape, and you can change the various patterns or how many notes are played. You can choose the keys that it's going to hit. So you might just have one note, or two notes, or three notes. How many octaves it's going to cover, a tone map, and lots of other options. So it's a really unique way of coming up with melodies, and melodies that can kind of interact with each other. So when I was working in Nanostudio2 the other day, I was intrigued to see that this Aphelian comes up as a MIDI input option. So I'm going to load it up, and I've got pretty much a blank project, and I've got the Obsidian default patch. So let's find something, maybe something nice and bassy or synthy. What have we got? Something a bit, no, I don't want kicks. Something like that will do for the minute. So I've got a sound in, we can always change it. I'm going to go to my mixer, and then I'm going to click MIDI effects in the middle of the channel strip. And when I go to add MIDI effects, I will now see under external Aphelian. So I can add Aphelian in. Now, one thing I find slightly annoying is that I have to always remember to expand this window. So in the top right hand corner, next to the mute and solo buttons, there's an expand button. You need to press that in order to see all of the options. But now I can start to actually, hopefully, play something in, he says, with it not working. Why is it not working? Because I didn't press my notes. So once I press some notes and put the notes into the keyboard editor at the bottom, we can start to create some melodic patterns. So let's work with something a bit like A minor. And you can change the intensity of the notes, how fast they are. You can change into triplets as well if you wanted to. Let's stick with sixteenths. You can add a bit of swing as well. And here is where you can change the pattern. That's pretty nice, we'll keep that one. And now I can change the shape. So we've got a kind of pretty standard hexagon, and you can see all of these different options. And suddenly you're kind of creating rhythmic patterns out of your melodies that would be really hard to play by hand. We can go up some octaves, and if we change the octave range, you can see we're starting to hit some of the higher notes as well. You can also change the tone, shading they call it, I think so. This is kind of, I guess, how frequently it will hit the notes. I'm a little bit confused how to explain how this background layout works, and we have a sort of radial version as well. So I guess it's more like the probability that it will hit these notes. And the great thing is you can have pattern 1, you could then have pattern 2, which is a completely different pattern and might be a different set of notes. That sounds terrible. We'll get rid of that one. Nice. Go back to our synth. Sorry, wrong button. Maybe let's turn the cutoff up a bit. And we've suddenly got this really interesting, flowing rhythmic pattern based on our notes. Now there's still more options that you can do within Aphelian. So one useful thing is when we clicked on the patterns, you can see, because you've got to think to yourself, well, how am I going to get these notes into the sequencer? So one thing that you can do is you can actually select the patterns based on notes in an octave. So let's say we're looking for the lowest octaves or one of the lower octaves. And I stop that for a moment, and I've got my Roly C board here. Okay, we're connected. So, if I go back to my track, so yes, now that the track is playing, my bad, you can see the pattern numbers changing, and I'm changing this by pressing the keys on my MIDI keyboard. So, if I wanted to, I would now record this as MIDI notes. And let's just have a look at that, and we can see my MIDI notes there. Slightly out of time, so I could maybe move these about. So that's C-1, which is what I'd set it to. And, oh, I think that's slightly the wrong way around. So let's move that one there, and this one over to here. And let's see what happens when we play that back. Great, so Aphelian is responding as we would want it to. Okay, so let's just move this pattern to the side for a bit. And let's work on a slightly different approach. So what we could do now with Aphelian, let's use the same sound, but instead you can actually also play in arpeggios. So these would be directly triggered from the keyboard, as you can see. Oops, let's expand this. So I'm playing C, E flat and F sharp, and I could record these notes in instead. So that's recorded in, but of course I can always change the tonal pattern, or the the events that are being played, and even the shape if I wanted to. I love these circular ones. And if we look back at the notes, we can see I've got my chord that I held down in order to trigger the arpeggio. So really, really nice way of coming up with these melodies. And of course it's not always just about melodies. So what we could do, let's create a new Obsidian track. And we're going to find, let's say, a percussion. hi-hat maybe. Here we go. Don't want hi-hat, snare. Cool. So now let's load up a MIDI effect. Aphelian. I'm gone onto ARP mode for the moment. Now, because it's not pitched, I can't see that the shape is going to make much difference particularly. But again, it's a really nice way of getting some patterns in that you may not think about. And now I could go back and I could set up another one, and this time we want something a bit bassier. So we'll add Aphelian again, and we'll go back to the synth. Something nice and long. Let's see what we can find. So this time, I think we're working in A. Not so keen on that sound, so let's find something a bit nicer. Oh my gosh. You can't be listening to that one through the laptop, you've got to have headphones on for that. So what we could do now in Aphelian is we're using the sequence, and we could just do a couple of notes. Lost in this thing. That's the trouble. And we'll do one more just for fun. And we'll find something a bit more. Let's maybe some high strings. In fact, no. What we'll do, what I was going to show you, is that obviously this can also work with external instruments. So we could have something like Troublemaker, which is lots of fun. It's an acid synth, and this lends itself so well to kind of acid style synths. MIDI effects, external, Aphelian. Have this and you love writing dance music, this is just such an essential one. And so I know this is kind of quickly put together, but you get the idea of just how quickly and easily we can start to make some really interesting rhythmic melodies without the need to really input anything. You look at the sequencer, there's nothing there. So it really is great fun. And of course, one of the nice things that you can do with the bass particularly, if you want some longer bass notes, I'm trying to find something a bit long. instead of 16th events, we have 8th events. That's definitely slightly less movement, but you get the idea. And this is giving us much longer notes. So there you go. So that's how you can work with Aphelian. And I think Aphelian's £10, £11 maybe on the App Store. As a standalone unit, it's absolutely fantastic and it's very easy to get lost in it. But when you start working it alongside Nanostudio in particular, you can come up with just some absolutely amazing ideas. I'll just very quickly show you one that I was working on. So, there's just so much movement in it, that's what I love about it. So on the bass, it's really peaking when it hits that note at the top. I think it does tend to push the latency a little bit. If we look at the Belgium synth, it just totally makes sense when you see it. The other ones were, I think it was this one. So the Troublemaker is, I'm sorry it's glitching slightly. Very graphic heavy, so I think too many of them and you may struggle a bit, but I think I need to fix my latency. That might be better. You get the idea. If you're an iPad composer, Aphelian is a fantastic tool, and I really recommend it just for having a good noodling and play about alongside Nanostudio or as its own standalone app. Have fun!